Welcome back to Parenting Unpacked. You're here with Dr. Siobhan Kennedy Costantini and Dr. Kristen Summer as we muddle our way through parenthood with evidence, empathy, and common sense. Let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us again on Parenting Unpacked. We are here with Dr. Kristen Summer and myself, Dr. Siobhan Kennedy Costantini, and today we're going to be talking all about attachment. So attachment parenting is a really hot topic idea. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of misinformation about what it is, a lot of over classification of what it is, a lot of judgment and shame around people who do it incorrectly, or that's quote unquote incorrectly, or people who don't do it. Anyway, it's a hot topic by all definitions, but we are going to cover what it is, what it isn't, and the evidence behind it.
Yes, we are. So first things first, attachment parenting is entirely different from attachment theory. That's a fun place to start. I think these two things often get conflated, where people think that the only way to create a secure attachment is to follow rigidly the central tenets or rules of attachment parenting. And even attachment parenting's rules kind of vary and change depending on which scientific literature you look at. So if you've never heard the term attachment parenting, congratulations, you've never been subjected to that kind of guilt-inducing chaos that comes across on social media. I don't know if crunchy mums exist on Instagram, Siobhan, but they absolutely...
A little bit. TikTok.
Yeah, they really live on TikTok. That's their vibe. And crunchy mums kind of wear attachment parenting like a badge. So what crunchy mums and a lot of social media rhetoric around attachment parenting is a really specific form of attachment parenting, which is that you must bed share, you must breastfeed, you must baby wear. Basically, you must have that child attached to you at all times in some capacity, and if you don't, you're not going to create a secure attachment, and that's absolutely not the case. There are...
Wait, sorry, my mic dropped off. I made Christian do some giggles. I won't continue. Sorry to interrupt such important talk.
No, actually, I'm done. So what do you want to say about this, Siobhan?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So I've done a series on Instagram about doing some myth busting about this exact thing. So these kind of tenets or kind of guidelines about how you correctly, quote unquote, do attachment parenting kind of stems from this pediatrician in the States, Dr. William Sears. So I don't think that he per se maybe meant for it to go this far. From the few things I've read from his actual individual work, there's a lot more nuance. But as we know, when it comes to social media, especially TikTok, nuance goes thrown out the window, which we're not about, which is why we've got a podcast to try and talk through these things in a bit more detail. But he kind of promotes the 5 B's of attachment parenting. So they are bonding at birth, bed sharing, baby wearing, breastfeeding, and being responsive. So of those 5, there is only one that is demonstrated to help promote exactly the last one, the little pinky that Christian's pointing at me, the last one, being responsive, is the only thing that has any evidence to demonstrate that it facilitates a secure attachment. But the difficulty is that the other 4 aren't bad. The other 4 are really good. So having an opportunity to bond at birth, having close skin-to-skin, one-on-one time at birth can be really great, but it's not always possible. Whether the mum experiences medical issues, whether the baby experiences medical issues, if you've got a preemie baby, they don't get that stuff because the nurses and doctors are busy trying to keep them alive. So I know I've spoken to countless parents who had preemie babies or NICU babies, or they themselves had to be rushed to surgery, and they feel immensely guilty that they didn't get that bonding at birth moment, and they feel really awful that they have somehow sabotaged or jeopardized their bond and relationship with their baby, which couldn't be further from the truth, because attachment and a secure bond doesn't happen within the space of an hour. It happens over years and years and years. And we'll get into it when we talk about attachment theory a bit more, but attachment isn't static. It changes, it grows, and it develops within the context of relationships. Baby wearing, also really great because it allows your baby to be close to you, so it helps to provide opportunities to be more responsive. Bed sharing can allow you to be more responsive. Being physically close can help support being responsive. Breastfeeding, similar. If your baby is physically closer to you and physically attached to you, it can sometimes help support being responsive. None of these things are required. There's plenty of ways you can do it without any of those other things. Being responsive, paying attention to your children's cues, and then responding appropriately to those cues is the only thing that supports a secure attachment.
And Siobhan, does that mean we need to be responsive all the time in order to ensure secure attachment, or do we only need to be responsive part of the time? Can you tell me so I don't freak out, or so other parents don't freak out?
The way you phrase that question, Kristen, I have a sneaking suspicion that you know the answer, but I will bite nonetheless because it's a great question. So you don't. The real key thing when it comes to attachment parenting and attachment theory is that it's about a pattern of responsiveness. It's not that your baby is responded to 100% of the time accurately. That's impossible. We are human people. We get it wrong. We're delayed, we're distracted, we have to live our lives. So we can't get it right all the time. And to be fair, that would do our children that would do them no good whatsoever because that's not how people work. That's not how relationships work. So the real key is a pattern of responsiveness so that our children can most of the time rely on the fact that their needs will be responded to, that their needs will be met. So not all the time, but most of the time. So a lot of the research that's been done in this area of attachment parenting and secure relationships is done by the group who kind of founded the Circle of Security Parenting. So they've got over 40 years of research to demonstrate how these kind of relationship styles and different things that you can do as a parent help support a secure attachment. And lots of research to go into why a secure attachment is beneficial for your child's development, which we'll touch on a bit later. But they have found that 30 to 40% of the time, provided you're responding to your children's needs accurately, 30 to 40% of the time, you will have a secure attachment, which is amazing. Like, that's a fail rate in any other measure. So that's where this idea of being a good enough parent comes in. So you don't have to be perfect. No one is perfect. So even if you tried, you wouldn't attain it. But all you need to be is good enough. And their whole phrasing is that good enough is good enough. Getting it right most of the time is good enough. Being a good enough parent is all your child needs.
Awesome. So I'm going to preempt some questions here because I always get a million on TikTok and I know what my audience would ask. And the first one is responding. Does that mean responding correctly? Does that mean I have to respond to my child, but I'm going to get it wrong because I don't actually know what my kid wants? They're crying. Is it for milk or is it for comfort or do they have gas? Is that when I'm getting it incorrect? So that's fine. Or is not responding me taking 5 minutes to respond? Is it me doing some form of cry it out, extinction or intermittent responding with my child's sleep training? Is that classed under this not responding? What is responding? What is isn't responding correctly? And where does not responding at all and allowing a child to cry for a little while or a long time, where do these all fall?
What a great question, and what a complicated answer I'm going to give you. So the real short answer is it depends, which is not fun for anyone. As parents, we are stressed and tired and exhausted, and all we want for our children is the best. We want to get it right, which means we want short answers, quick answers, and easy to implement answers. I don't have those for you. I am very sorry. When it comes to responding, what we're talking about is kind of connecting with your child, kind of cueing into their needs, responding to them. So whether or not that's it could be as simple as they fall off a stool and they squawk. Maybe they haven't even hurt themselves. They just kind of cry out. And it's about like looking up, making eye contact, for example, and then going, "Oh, you fell. that counts as responding. That is you connecting. So in the shortest terms, rather than going a big long spiel, which I could happily do, and we'll talk here for hours, which maybe someone would be interested in, but I digress. It's about connecting with, maintaining that relationship. It's about kind of emotionally tuning in and connecting. Importantly, it's not about giving your child what they want necessarily, particularly when it comes to older children. As we've talked about on this podcast many times, my child is obsessed with caramello koalas, which is an Australian chocolate that's koala shaped and full of caramel. He's obsessed. He wants one every hour of the day, and I don't blame him. They're very yummy. But being a parent with some hopes for his nutritional future, I don't allow that. And that's not giving him what he wants, but I still respond to his needs. So I sit down and say, you really want a caramello koala? I don't blame you. They're really yummy, but we can't have one. I won't let you have one. And then we move on. Sometimes that is not acceptable to him. Sometimes he loses his shit. Other times he's distractible. But again, when it comes to responding, it's not about giving them what they want or even like meeting them exactly where they are. It's just about creating that opportunity for connection.
Right. And so I think that's a really succinct, concise answer, really. The answer is...
Thank you. I tried hard.
The answer is connection. So I think I might have added a bit too many questions into that first one. So responding correctly doesn't mean giving them exactly what they want and getting it right. It means connecting with them, being there in the moment, assuring them that you're there and you're giving them comfort. Now, the second part of it was things like when children are crying, through methods like sleep training. And the reason I asked that question is because I'm always tagged in this on TikTok. There are a couple of different people on TikTok who all have PhDs in psychology, not necessarily child development, but in psychology, who have some level of training and attachment, and everyone kind of disagrees in the like camp of cry it out and further and extinction and those kinds of crying methods of sleep training. And we're not going to get into that in this episode, but I want to give you a quick and dirty answer because I always get it. And I want to assure you, if you're listening, that sleep training your child will not be the complete undoing of your child's secure attachment. You can still have a secure attachment with your child and sleep train. If you follow me on my socials, know that I think that sleep training should be a tool that we resort to last and that it's not something that we need to do in 99% of cases. But if you have chosen it, if you feel compelled to use it, please don't feel guilty in undermining your child's attachment relationship with you. That's what we're talking about today, is just attachment. We can get into other details later. But in terms of attachment, a secure attachment relationship with an established pattern of responding to your child outside of the sleep training experiences will ensure that you continue carrying on a secure attachment. Now,
absolutely.
To sidestep this, Siobhan, let's talk about why everyone's so concerned with secure attachment. Why is it so important that we get that secure attachment going in early childhood?
What a good question. So like I said earlier, a lot of the research comes from this group who, so they're kind of the product, for want of a better word, that they've created is called Circle of Security. And it's very much based around this idea that the parent is the secure base. So there's this really great infographic out there that if you just Google Circle of Security, you'll see a picture of a child in a circle, like a cartoon picture, running to the parent, and there's big hands. So the hands represent the secure base. And that children use their primary caregiver or their primary caregivers as their safe spot, their safe haven. And then from there, they explore the world. And this is why, and I mean, many of us still do this with our parents today. When we go out into the world, we explore, we go off, we have fun, and then we experience a setback, whether that's a breakup or we lose our job or even something good, we come back to our parents or our caregiver or our attachment figure. So for some of us, that is our mum. For some of us, that is our partner. And for our children, it's their primary caregiver. So that's the person that we take our our deepest hurts and also our biggest joys too. So it's this idea that you explore from the secure base and then you return to the secure base. So as caregivers, we provide the safety and security. And as I said, there's so much research behind this. I said 40 years. Turns out it's 70 years. So that's pretty impressive. 70 years of research. Wowee. But the research, I'll just give you a really short summary to highlight how and why a secure attachment is beneficial for our children. So just let's do the laundry list. So more securely attached children are more able to experience happiness with their parents. They feel less anger towards their parents. They turn to their parents for help when they're in trouble. They're more likely to be able to solve problems on their own, so they have more resilience. They know that most problems have an answer, so they, instead of getting frustrated and overwhelmed, they're more likely to persevere in finding solutions and be confident that they have the capacity to find solutions. They're more likely to have successful and lasting friendships. They get along better with their friends. They solve problems with their friends, so they use their social relationships as problem-solving tools. They have better relationships with their siblings. They are kinder to people around them. They're more likely to trust the people they love, so they have trusting and healthy relationships. They're more confident that the world is a nice place and that good things will come to them. And they just have higher self-esteem. So to sum up in one short sentence, they're just healthier, happier, more rounded people.
Absolutely. Now, in contrast to children with secure attachments, children with insecure attachments are documented to have more disruptive behavioral conduct disorders, anxiety and depression, some more internalizing issues, and a whole range of other tricky things to navigate. And so I'm going to put my developmental psychology lecturer hat on for a minute and give you a quick insight into what attachment theory is, because this is where we pull a lot of this information. This is where Circle of Security kind of grabs their information and moves with it. And then we'll talk about Circle of Security parenting as an intervention paradigm later, because Circle of Security isn't just an evidence base. They're actually not an evidence base as much as they are an actual intervention program that you can actually take and get educated on.
It's like a course.
Exactly.
A course or workshops that they do.
Exactly. So I'll start with a quick summary of attachment theory. So John Bowlby in the late 60s, early 70s theorized that infants and young children are predisposed to form attachments to important caregivers. So oftentimes that's the mother and the father, any kind of primary caregiver, but it can be any parent or parental figure in their life that spends a whole lot of time with them. And it can be in later stages a daycare educator. We want to form those strong attachment relationships with people that care for our children, because that will help in a whole host of ways, but I'm getting off track. And he theorizes that children use their caregivers as a secure base for which they can explore and to which they can return as a safe haven when needed for comfort and protection, which is what Siobhan said. So he argued that attachment behavioral systems evolved because infant proximity to the caregiver tended to increase the likelihood of infant survival by ensuring infants were safe and received needed care. So it's this really evolutionary mechanism where babies are born knowing I need to stick with someone who'll keep me alive. And we know that they have preferences for mothers and fathers even from birth, as Siobhan gave me a quick little info on right before we started. So they have this innate predisposition to stick with someone who'll keep them alive because they're so defenseless. Humans are born so preterm relative to other animals that are born walking and things like that, basically a toddler. So they definitely need to attach to someone who's going to keep them safe. So when children experience stress, distress, tiredness, or danger, this attachment system is activated. Then the child actively will signal their caregiver for assistance, for example, by crying, moving close to an available caregiver, or signaling a desire to be picked up. And signaling, friends, is crying. That is, in those early stages, signaling is crying. Later, it might be yelling, "Mum, mum, 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 mum." But in the first stages, it's a whole lot of screaming at the top of their lungs because they are concerned for their safety because it's something that they've never experienced before, even if it's just a little bit of nothing that you think is fine. So in contrast, when children are calm, they'll tend to explore their environment. And this exploration takes so many different forms. Young infants can look around and mouth objects, so before they can actually physically move. Older children might move and interact with the environment, and this is when you'll see things like separation anxiety come in. I'll do a quick run through of all the phases in a minute. And exploration is really important to understanding. Is really important because it allows children to learn and grow in their understanding of how the world works. So having a secure base from which children can explore actually promotes children's development. And that's why secure attachment ends up having this whole host of positive benefits throughout life, because having that security to know I can go and explore something and be creative and curious without constantly worrying about whether I'm in danger is really important. And it'd be really important for you too. We all have these secure bases. We all have attachment styles. And attachment theory is not just for infants. It has grown and has been applied to adults as well. And it's used in adult psychology as well. I think the people who first crafted the attachment theory styles for adults were Hazan and Shaver in the 90s. I'll talk about that bit in a minute. But yeah, basically having a secure attachment means that a child feels safe enough to explore their world, and exploring their world is what contributes primarily to children's learning and development. And that's just why we see so many great flow-on effects. So that's attachment theory in a nutshell. That's Bowlby's theory. So he's the father of attachment. That we kind of call him the father of attachment, at least. Who knows if he actually is. Scientific history gets a little bit murky.
We had a grad student that did it all.
It's a great segue, Siobhan, because although Bowlby had this great big theory, Mary Ainsworth was his grad student. And Mary Ainsworth crafted this way of classifying attachment styles within attachment theory. In collaboration with Bowlby, but as we know, grad students do a lot of grunt work, and I'm pretty sure this is probably Mary Ainsworth's brainchild. So what happened here was basically...
Were they a couple? I think they were a couple.
Don't say that. I don't know.
I know.
I don't gossip about...
Oh, hold up. Now I'll check. You keep going. No, sorry. Sorry, continue. I'm being a distracting bad influence.
This stuff is like 50 years old, but Siobhan is more concerned about the romanticism.
Look, aren't we all into gossip?
Oh, we are. And aren't there many husband and wife co-authors on many a paper? But anyways, while Siobhan is sleuthing the gossip, let me tell you about Mary Ainsworth, because she designed what's called the strange situation task. And the strange situation task is a way to classify babies into attachment styles. So it takes a baby generally under about 1 year old and gives them a series of events. So basically, baby and mum walk into a room and start playing. So as soon as baby uses mum as a secure base and starts exploring, mum leaves the room. And obviously the baby knows that mum's left the room, and a stranger enters as well. So there's this danger, and mum's left the room, so their secure base is gone. And unsurprisingly, all the babies get upset. Of course they do. Their secure base, whether they're securely attached or not, is gone, so they're upset. Now, what's really interesting is when mum returns, how the babies respond. So a secure baby, when mum returns, is easily soothed, calms back down, and will often go out and explore again. And this was how Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby were able to classify babies into secure attachment. So if they showed this pattern of responding where they were crying but then easily soothed as soon as mum came back, cool, that's a securely attached baby. And this tended to be predictive, like their performance in the strange situation task tended to correlate with their childhood measures of attachment as well. For the most part, there is a little bit of a caveat there, but for the most part. Now, there were, back when Mary Ainsworth did it, 2 other attachment classifications. There's insecure avoidant and insecure resistant, and they vary a little bit. So insecure avoidant, I always get these mixed up because they're all insecure. But insecure avoidant, and Siobhan can correct me if I'm wrong, insecure avoidant is where when mum returns, the baby is not easily calmed down and soothed. There is a prolonged period of crying, and it's very hard to calm that baby down, and they become quite clingy. In contrast, insecure resistant is when a mum returns, the baby ignores her, is almost mad at her, avoids eye contact, avoids any kind of physical contact, is still distressed but doesn't want anything to do with mum. Did I classify that?
The opposite.
There you go.
Sorry, it's fine. Fine. But you, here we go. I'll do 3 points of order. Yes. 1, I was wrong. They weren't in a couple. So that's we'll get that bit done. 2, anxious, avoidant, insecure attachment. So it goes under different terms.
Yeah.
So, but basically, avoidant. It's an insecure style, and it's avoidant. So typically, what happens is that when the parent leaves, the child doesn't display any distress, and then when they come back, they either ignore them or they approach. They show some tendency to approach, but also so either they ignore completely or they kind of have like mixed ignoring behavior. So this was kind of theorized later by Ainsworth and Bell, saying that this it's almost like they appear to be like, I don't care that you left, not my, like, I don't mind. But the thinking is that through later studies with heart rate, they measure their heart rates, and these babies were supremely distressed. So that this kind of display of not bothered was a mask for their distress, perhaps as a social kind of barrier, or to not portray that they're not weak, that's not the right word, but to not portray that they're vulnerable, but they're very much in distress.
Yeah.
Whereas resistant, they show distress even before separation happens. They are really, really clingy and really difficult to comfort when the parent comes back. So in response to the parent's absence, they either show sign of helpless passivity, or they show so much distress that in the strange situation procedure, so in the tests where it was done to classify, the session had to be cancelled because the babies were so distraught.
Yeah, so that's the classifications. Thank you, Siobhan. Now, what is something that isn't really uncommon in developmental psychology experiments is that about 20% of the babies were never classified into any one of these classifications. So in US populations, which is where we have the most data, we know that majority of children, about 50%, I think, generally get classified into secure, and then it's about 15-ish each for the other two insecure. Insecure avoidant, insecure resistant, 15% of babies get classified into each of those. And then there's always like 20% of babies left over. So further down the track, an additional attachment style was added, which was disorganized. Now, Siobhan, do you want to go through what insecure disorganized is?
Sure. So this fourth category, like we said, was added a bit later, and it's kind of left as an open-ended one. So it's kind of the idea that whilst it kind of might be all a bit too all-encompassing, it's more the idea that these infants appear to have no kind of consistent approach to handling their attachment figure leaving. So they have different response styles depending. So they sometimes have like a really strong proximity-seeking behavior. So sometimes they reach out. Other times, or even within the same session, they might really kind of go for their parent and then push them away, or like it's as the name suggests, it's really disorganized. So they kind of show elements of the others, the other insecure attachment styles, but it's a catch-all. But when it comes to later kind of biological testing that was added, physiological stuff to help support this stuff, they found that these babies had really high levels of cortisol in their saliva, which is how we test this. So they were demonstrating really reactive stress responses.
Yeah, so
that basically they're really stressed when their parents leave. They don't overreact, but they react very strongly with heightened stress responses when they are separated from their caregivers. And I wonder whether we should talk a bit about separation anxiety here, because there's a level of separation anxiety that's completely normal, even with securely attached babies at different stages of development. And also maybe we should touch on, and I'd love to open this up to you, Kristen, touch on the fact that these attachment styles aren't static, that they change and grow. And so just because your child might be experiencing one particular style at any given time doesn't mean they're stuck, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that they're doomed.
Exactly. So in Bowlby's original theory, like theoretical framework, he classifies different phases of attachment. And when the strange situation test is typically done is that 9 to 12 month mark, which is the height of separation anxiety. So I'll jump through the phases really quickly. So the first phase is 0 to 2 months. So newborns definitely show a preference to mum or dad from an hour after birth, but they are still really oriented towards just going to anyone that'll care for them. So they don't show as much distress upon separation. Between 2 and 7 months is where phase 2 comes in. And this is where you'll see that attachment and that preference start to grow. They'll start to have a primary attachment figure and a secondary attachment figure. Usually mum is primary and dad is secondary, at least in all of the research that they've done on attachment styles. And it really starts to hone in basically on the person they spend the most amount of time with. That's the one they start to feel is their secure base, their safe haven, is the person they want to be around most of the time. And then you see this third stage, which is 7 months to 24 months. I mean, it continues extending beyond there, but around this time is when children start to develop these really specific attachments, when they start to really rely on that primary attachment figure, who is the primary caregiver, and when that separation anxiety starts to explode. So that's when they start to get very upset upon separation from their primary attachment figure. It's why daycare drops can be so hard. It's why mum going out for an hour and leaving the baby with dad can be so hard, and it's incredibly normal. And yeah, it's that's the phases of attachment. Separation anxiety is really normal. I know I had a really big response on this when I was talking about how I dropped my daughter off at daycare. And I know for myself, when I was going through this like stage of getting my child into daycare, I had this really conflicting feeling that I had to talk myself down from. I was like, I don't want my child to get attached to anybody else because she's mine, and I want to be all there is for her. But also, like, I want to have some time to work. That's what's really good for my brain. So she needed to go to childcare, and I had to talk to myself about like making sure that she formed really strong positive attachments with other caregivers so that it would actually lessen her separation anxiety from me. Being her only attachment figure actually means that I'm limiting her capacity to have great relationships with other people, because children can have other attachment relationships, and it's really important to have these attachment relationships with daycare educators. And we're really lucky that I'm fairly certain my daycare educators had done the Circle of Security course, or at least had been educated on it in some capacity, so they also understood how attachment works. So if you've ever felt that way, especially if you're starting to think about putting your kid into daycare in that like 1 year mark when you're returning from maternity leave, know that that's when separation anxiety is at its peak. That's why it's so hard to separate from your child. But also it's really important to help your child create those positive attachment relationships with other people, because it will lessen that as well. Do you have anything to add on the daycare part?
Yeah, I think, well, you summed it up beautifully, as you always do. The only thing I would add is that when we think about our evolutionary history, our children, it's so unusual that all they have is mum. Whereas particularly nowadays, and particularly in our pandemic experience, we are so isolated and so unsupported that it's not at all uncommon that our little ones have only us. And if we're lucky, our partner's been able to work at home, and so they have only us and our partner. Often no grandparents because of border closures, And that's just not normal. And we all know this. We're all suffering as a result. But in terms of our evolutionary history, when we lived in our villages, our children would have had dozens of attachment figures by the time they were one, whether that's older siblings, parents, grandparents, and auntie, the local village leader. Like, they would have all these really secure relationships. Certainly they'd have a preference for their parents, but a lot of these, like, this structure of other caregivers was already inbuilt into the way society worked. And I think it's really important for those of us that struggle with the idea that I don't want my child to have other attachments, which is a very normal response. I've heard that from dozens and dozens, hundreds of mums, that we can think of daycare as our village. And it is. That's how that works. Our daycare educators, our like childcare workers, they're our village. They're our children's other caregivers, and it's really helpful to think of it in that way, that we're giving our child the tools they need to form healthy relationships with other people, which is what we want for them in their lives.
And if you want a Googleable term, it's called Aloe parenting. So in villages, it's
ALLO parenting.
Yeah, so in villages, it's Aloe parenting because everyone contributes to raising children. But yeah, we have to kind of shift our thinking now, and scientists are doing just this in considering that daycare educators are Aloe parents, because children can spend upwards of 40 hours a week with them, and that's a huge amount of wait time that children are interacting with their daycare educators. Now, moving away from that, let's talk about some really like old and longitudinal research about attachment styles, because for a long time people thought that if a child had one style of attachment in infancy, that would carry through the rest of their life, and that's not entirely true. So there is still a huge majority of people who will have the same attachment style in infancy as they do in adulthood, but it's not static, and there is a capacity to change, and it does change. I think about 30% vary throughout their lifespan, which, when you think about how many kids are secure to begin with, most children don't move away from secure. Some do, but not many. But a lot of insecure kids will actually move into secure attachment styles as they grow and they age. So a lot of the research has found that babies who are classified as insecure at 1 will change to secure 2 months later.
Yeah, I think this is so important to think about when it comes to testing, when it comes to experimental testing of any kind, psychological in particular, because that's our background, is that when we test children for these kinds of things, we usually have 1 hour in their day. And the things that aren't necessarily taken into account, sometimes we do, but aren't necessarily taken into account, is, have they napped that day? Are they tired? Do they need a snack? Like, are they teething? There are so many factors that, as we know as adults, they can affect the way we experience our moods, that aren't necessarily taken into account. A lot of the time, it kind of all washes out in the wash. In terms of when you're testing 1,000 kids, those factors tend to present less, in terms of statistics, seem to be less relevant once you have big sample sizes. But these are still super relevant, which I think is one of the reasons we can't rely too heavily on the research when it comes to doing things with our individual child. Does that make sense? Have I said that?
Yes, absolutely.
In a way that's,
yes. But even with experimental limitations, we still find that there is changes in children's attachment styles. So over the long term, what the research finds is that children's experiences with negative life events can shift them from secure attachment into insecure attachment. And this actually ties in really well to last week's episode, because I talked about negative life events a little bit. They are actually the exact same thing as ACEs. So all those negative experiences in life can shift a child from secure into insecure, but then they can also shift back. And with insecurely attached children, they can be shifted into secure by a change in the pattern of responding from their primary caregivers. So if you have an insecurely attached child, it's never too late to start instantiating this consistent pattern of responding. And I think I've gotten this quite a few times, these questions from foster parents and adoptive parents. I have a child who is 2, they appear insecurely attached. is it too late? Absolutely not. There is a whole other bunch of things that we need to unpack here, which we're not going to do in the attachment episode, but purely showing up consistently, offering that connection, and providing a pattern of responding to the child that is stable, predictable, and safe is all your child needs to go from insecure to secure. Now, that's one thing that will shape attachment after it is formed. But there's actually something that I think we need to talk about before we even get to being like to how we change attachment after it's formed. And that's how attachment is actually formed to begin with. Is it simply the pattern of responding? Or what else can contribute to a child's attachment style, Siobhan?
So on top of things like the responsiveness from the caregiver, another factor that is really, really important when it comes to attachment styles is our temperament. So quick refresher, temperament is the word that we use to describe kind of the building blocks of personality. So as we know, our children, their personality isn't fixed. But what we do have, that what most of us are born with, are kind of our temperaments. We're born with tendencies to respond to information and stimulus in specific ways. So this is probably a great topic for another episode entirely, but to summarize, we have, and the terms are starting to change, but there's kind of easy temperaments, so the kind of babies who are really chill, not too distressed when things change, they are happy to go with the flow, they're just nice, relaxed, happy babies. Then at the complete other end, we have highly strung babies. Often in the literature, it's called difficult, which obviously has negative connotations, and there's kind of a shift to call it highly reactive, highly sensitive, or highly spirited children and babies, because that's kind of a better representation. It's children who experience stimulus and respond accordingly. So they might find sounds really disruptive. They might experience hunger as a really extreme physical sensation in ways that other children might not. So so temperament is a huge factor when it comes to our attachment styles. And that makes sense because for children who are experiencing stimulus or information in the world as really intense, that's more likely to affect their social experiences. So these children might be more responsive and more affected by their caregiver leaving. And it's not so much that the caregiver has done anything wrong, but that these children are just more affected by it. And one parent can respond to two children in the same way, and those children, depending on their temperament styles, might experience that in completely different ways.
Absolutely. So temperament has a huge impact on attachment styles. So even if you are displaying this consistent pattern of responding to your child, it doesn't guarantee you that you will have a secure or insecure infant. Now, another thing is that I think is always really important. So I've been teaching attachment theory for 7 years, and for the first 5 of those years I used to get my students to do an entire essay on whether attachment was stable or not throughout the lifespan. So I've marked many of these, and thank you undergraduate students for being so brilliant and giving me so much fun, interesting information to read, because one of the things that they'd often come up with is the research on the difference between attachment styles with mum and dad. Now, it's not just temperament. Attachment seems to be not just a way of, it doesn't seem to be embodied just within the child. It seems to be an artifact of the dyadic relationship, so between caregiver and child. So some of the research finds that although a child can be securely attached to mum, they can be insecurely attached to dad, or they can be securely attached to dad and insecurely attached to mum. Do you have anything to add to that, Siobhan?
Yeah, I think I think that's a perfect summary, but I think it might be worth thinking more broadly about our own experiences and our own attachment styles. Like a great example or like corollary for this is that if, for example, you have a toxic relationship with your mother as an adult, you might still really have a really wonderful and loving relationship with your partner. And like, I think it kind of ties into the idea, like we're saying, that it is flexible and it changes, that you might have a toxic relationship with your parents and have throughout your early adult years experienced toxic relationships, but that doesn't prevent you from having a secure and healthy relationship. It can sometimes influence the way you experience relationship, and that can be somewhat of a barrier, but it's not whatever the appropriate word is, it's not set in stone. Like, these things can change, which is what we're trying to talk about. And it can change during infancy, it can change during our teen years. And as Kristen said, it's very specific to the individual. So you can have secure attachments. If you have 5 different romantic partners throughout your life, you can have a different relationship and attachment style with each and every one.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I know this is a parenting podcast, but this is also, there is 2 people in a parenting partnership as well. It's really important to know that just because you might identify as being insecurely attached to your partners and your parents throughout your life doesn't mean that it makes you an insecurely attached person. It's not a death sentence to your relationship styles. It's not like you can kiss goodbye to having that happy, secure attachment that other people seem to really enjoy, and the same goes for your child. There is always room to move, and it is always a dynamic and fluid relationship style. It changes as the 2 people in the relationship change as well. So it's hard to tell what's the chicken and the egg. Does the child pull a certain pattern of responding from the mother? Does the mother pull a certain pattern of responding from the child? It's kind of both. And this happens.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yes.
They both do.
Yeah, so it really is an artifact of the relationship. So it can almost be damaging sometimes to classify a child as a certain attachment style. And this is often a criticism of attachment styles in particular, because it is not just the child's attachment style. It is the dyad's attachment style. It is the relationship between the primary attachment figure and the infant or the child or the 2 adults. And that's why there's been a little bit more of a push to start investigating attachment with other caregivers. And I know now that one of my colleagues is now exploring attachment styles with educators in daycares, which I'm really excited to see that research.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're hoping to see that soon, and I'm sure we'll share it as soon as she has something to publish. We'll probably get her on here eventually. But yeah, so we're now pushing towards looking at how the different attachment styles vary even within a single child at the exact same time point with different people. So it's very tricky to try and like hammer this down. But yeah, this is where we're at. It's flexible. It's not set in stone. You haven't ruined your child if you didn't respond or do a certain parenting technique. If you weren't attachment parenting in early life, there is always time to change. With everything with children, there is always time to change and move towards a different parenting style or a different approach. Because just because you didn't have that knowledge then doesn't mean that you need to give up. It's like the whole like diet culture. Like, I've eaten a chocolate bar, now I have to stop eating healthy. Like, no, just keep going. It's okay. Like, you can, even if you slip up.
Yeah, we're all doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're all doing the best we can with the information we have available to us. And when we know more, we can do more and we can do better.
Yeah. And if we slip up, that's fine. We'll just get back on track as soon as we can. It's never going to undo all your good progress. You just have to keep going. So if you have a mental health crisis and you need to step away from being that primary attachment figure for your child for a while, that's okay, because you aren't undoing progress. You're just taking a minute to put your own oxygen mask on before you put anyone else's on. And if you slip up and yell at your kids, you're not going to destroy the attachment relationship that you spent years building. You just have to acknowledge that you were wrong, apologize, and move on and continue practicing the things that you know are important for your child's development and mental health.
Yeah. And I think that there's some really good key terms that are helpful when it comes to learning more about these kinds of things. So good enough parenting, which we touched on, and I'm sure we'll do a more in-depth episode on later on. Rupture and repair, which is an idea from circle security parenting as well. It's the idea that we aren't perfect parents, and when we make a mistake or when we cause a rupture in that relationship, the rupture itself isn't the problem. It's about how we address it. How do we repair the relationship once that rupture has happened? That's where our children can come back to us, or we can come back to them and really solidify that relationship again. That's the important part.
Exactly. So, Siobhan, let's tackle Circle of Security for a second. I want to talk a little bit more about it because I was doing some research on Circle of Security as an intervention program. So it's COSP, which is Circle of Security Parenting, because I think it's really cool. And in the era of online courses everywhere, this is probably a really well supported one. Now, what was really interesting to me, so Circle of Security Parenting has online modules that you can do, or there are trainers who are educated and then can like facilitate that course for you. It's received a ton of public funding. It's everywhere in Australia. I'm pretty sure it started in America in a Head Start institution, but it's very, very well supported by public funding in Australia. However, a recent paper that I was reading last night, so it was published in 2021, said that there's actually not a lot of evidence to say that the Circle of Security Parenting Intervention Program works. So it doesn't say it doesn't work, but there's no evidence out there. They took a qualitative measure from a bunch of facilitators and a bunch of parents to see like whether they felt it worked. But there isn't actually an overwhelming body of evidence to say quantitatively that it has changed parents' approaches to parenting. Can you commentate on this a little bit?
Yeah, I hadn't read that paper and I am very interested in doing so. I have read a little bit, not widely or extensively, but I had read a few studies that had suggested that there was an improvement. I suppose maybe not overwhelmingly. Maybe that's the key difference. I'd read a few that particularly it's highly successful in at-risk groups from the papers that I've read. So maybe in parenting relationships where one parent is in jail or one parent has experienced some really traumatic events. So whether or not they have experienced domestic violence, homelessness, these kinds of things, drug addiction. In those cohorts, it's demonstrated to be really beneficial for those relationships and has shifted about 20 to 30% of children out of insecure attachment styles into secure attachment. That's the stuff I've read, but I'd love to hear more about this study and how they kind of define things.
So I think we're going to go sciencey for a second here, but I promise I'm going to explain it as simply as I can. So this happens for all things in child development kind of research. There isn't an overwhelming consensus. And the first place I go when I'm looking for efficacy of certain interventions is to a meta-analysis, a systematic review, or even just a literature review. I just want to see whether this area of research is prone to publication bias, whether it's got scientific consensus, what size the effects are. These are all things that we do as scientists to kind of get some certainty, because what happens in research is that people start publishing their own individual studies, and then once there's enough research on it, they scoop them all together and they go, okay, like how is this body of research actually gelling together? And the problem with Circle of Security's research is not that it isn't showing positive results, because it is. It's that there are too many outcome measures and not enough agreement. So there's lots of like little outcome measures that are saying, yes, it's absolutely working, but there isn't one overwhelming outcome measure to say, absolutely, throw it at everyone that they've got. And I think this paper was just kind of arguing like, we need more research. We need more people doing this because there's such widespread dissemination and uptake of this program, and that's amazing.
But we want to know why it works and how it works.
Yeah, we want to drill into it. We want to figure out what it is. We want to figure out who to target. So I think there are certain things in science that need concrete findings. So the one that always springs to mind for me, because it's the one that everyone always battles me on, is on TikTok, is sleep training. There isn't scientific consensus on sleep training. And that one's a tricky one.
It's really inconsistent findings.
Yeah.
To summarize very briefly with sleep training, there is some evidence to say that it can be damaging. There's some evidence to say that it can be really great. But on both sides, that evidence is lacking. There's not many studies, and of the studies that have been done, the sample sizes are really small. And when you have few studies, small sample sizes, and small effects, so that's like a statistical measure, it's hard to generalize. So it's not saying that it's good, that it's bad, it's just we don't know.
Yeah, so with research like that, especially when there are things that say that it's possible that there are negative effects, we take a more measured approach and there isn't as much uptake. It's not as popular, or there's a lot more people like arguing about it, which is what you see in the kind of sleep training sphere. There is pro sleep trainers and anti sleep trainers, and they're very volatile. What I want to make clear here, because I know that a lot of my audience will actually go and read these papers and like will be very concerned if they see a paper that says that there isn't scientific consensus on it. So why are we so keen to support circle of security? But there is one very important thing that you need to know here. Just because it doesn't show overwhelming scientific consensus that it is working perfectly for these measures, that like specific measures that we do know that all of the outcomes that they have found are positive. And
so it's not negative and positive. It's all positive, but it's not consistently positive.
Yeah, it's
in the same ways.
They haven't done enough research yet, but it is all positive. And we're not going to find any negative effects, because anything that's there to boost infant and child mental health can never be inherently bad. It's not using behaviors and techniques to change behaviors that are like biological processes such as sleep. It's using an understanding of human psychology, of cognitive development, and understanding our evolutionary origins for creating attachments. And it is educating parents on simply what is biologically normal in their infants and children, because for many generations we've been taught to eschew this attachment with our children in order to create an independent, successful child, which was kind of championed in the birth of the Industrial Revolution around the same time as, opium for babies and sleep training and stuff like that. If you want the reference to opium for babies, I have a video on it, and Thought Rebellion, who is on Instagram, has a very good post on it, which is where I got my information from to begin with, and then fact checked. But yeah, so this is something that we are trying to make sure that parents know. The Industrial Revolution really tore apart family units. It really tore apart the village that parents need. And circle of security and attachment is clawing its way back to being where we should have our children at. It's only ever supporting child and infant mental health. So even if you find something that says that it isn't concrete yet, know that the reason it is so widespread, why it is so thoroughly financially supported by governments all over the world, is because it's showing positive effects only. And that's really important. Yes.
Yes, I think it's so important. And I think you kind of touch on that perfectly. And when it comes to Circle of Security, like definitely check it out. I think they're, as we've kind of attested, they're a great group that do some really important work. And like we said, that there are courses and workshops available both through the Circle of Security website, but even there's private providers all over the world. And I think they list them on their website too, that run both in-person workshops and online workshops. There are some that you pay for. There's plenty of free government spots, depending on where you are and whether your local government has taken it up. I know that there are here. They go very quickly because it's so well respected. But just to quickly summarize the kinds of things they do, it's usually a 6 to 8 week workshop. Sometimes there's expedited ones that are 2 to 4 weeks. But the kinds of things that they're getting you to talk about and think about is really reflecting on your parenting style, what impacts and affects it. So how you were parented, the kinds of relationships you currently have with your parents, the kind of relationship and the way you think about how you were parented, thinking about your child's experience of the world. So there's lots of empathy training and like stopping to think about, how is my child experiencing this? Why am I triggered by their crying? Why am I triggered by their whining? and just stopping to really think about how you show love, how your child shows love. So it's a really kind, gentle, empathy, connection-based intervention, and nothing but good can come from that.
Absolutely. So, Siobhan, I'm pretty sure that we have taken an hour up of time today.
I know. We talk so much. It's wonderful.
Too much. So we're gonna finish our episode here. Thank you for listening to the sciencey parts, the lecture parts, and hopefully you have taken something valuable from this chat today about attachment. Hopefully it has cleared up some of the misinformation that kind of exists on social media about attachment parenting and attachment styles and attachment theory, and has given you a little bit of insight into how science works around these things. Siobhan, do you want to give me your magic moment? Or no, let's do meltdown moments first. Your meltdown moment for the week.
My meltdown moment, probably the best one. We've had a few toddler moments this week. For those of you who don't know, my child is almost 2, and he's a beautifully wonderful child that I love to pieces, and doesn't get too emotionally volatile most of the time, but he has his moments, don't we all? We were on the front veranda, naked, playing with, I think I was clothed, for the best, playing with a box full of wood, a box full of branches, and he wanted me to move it, but he told me to do so by just squawking and pointing. So I moved it to where he pointed, but I was 3 centimeters off, and he screamed at me for 20 minutes because I got it wrong, and that's not acceptable. But in that moment, I was very proud of myself. I was able to stay regulated and see the ridiculousness in it, not get too frustrated, even though it's highly frustrating, and just kind of sit there and wait and be there for when he was ready to come back to me. But, oh boy, that was hard. It was big and sad.
That is big and that is sad, and that sounds
Who knew 3 centimeters was so important?
God, it's so important though. So important. My meltdown moment. So if you've been following along for a little while, I'm night weaning. And we have pretty much successfully night weaned at the moment, but the way that we night weaned, yeah, I know, right? It's shocking. We'll talk more about night weaning in another episode because I have a whole process, or like 40 minutes worth of videos on my TikTok if you can't wait. Anyways, so the way that we're night weaning is that I told her that so she still gets fed to sleep, but in the middle of the night we don't night wean, or we don't have milk. So I say, Mummy's body needs a rest. We're not having milk until the sun comes up, and I'm doing it in summer, which means that the sun comes up at 4, which is great. Thank God. Yep. But so she now knows that only if when the sun's up I can have milk, but she loves milk. She loves breastfeeding, and she'll do it 500 times a day if I let her. So she'll have just had a breastfeed 5 minutes before, and she'll ask me again, and I'll be like, nope, we've just had some milk. Are you hungry? Are you feeling worried? We can go to the calm down corner. And she's like, no, sun's up.
Oh, bless. I mean, she's right.
She is absolutely right. And it hurts my soul to be like, I understand that the sun's up, but we can't have any more milk. And that just kicks off the biggest tantrums, the biggest meltdowns. She just gets so sad so quickly because she doesn't understand. Because the sun's up, but there's also this nuance, you can't have milk if you've just had milk
all the time.
Yeah, I don't need you to be hanging off my body 24/7, 18/7.
12/7.
So that's our meltdown moment for the week.
That's hard. We used to, when Timo went through a similar stage when we were weaning, and me and my husband would just shout at the top of our lungs, "Closed for business!" Mostly to kind of get our own sanity through it. Have to try and make it funny because life is sad enough. Mm-hmm. But then it got to the point where Timo, he'd kind of start to he wasn't talking as much then, but just go, "Close for business." It was the cutest thing ever.
Aww.
And he still says it now. It's a phrase that we use anytime anything's off limits.
Close for business.
He's not a fan, obviously.
No. And what's your magic
moment?
Like
most children, he wants all the things all the time. Well, my magic moment is very me-focused, which I'm all about right now. I have done my nails, for those watching on YouTube. I am obsessed. I'm not a very girly girl, but I'm obsessed with nails. Don't know why, but I'm here for it. And I used to get gel nails done all the time, gel shellac nails, but it's expensive. So I got myself a nail lamp, and I do my own little nails. And they're pretty and Christmassy, and I'm going to add sparkles to them later because I love sparkles. They make me happy. And I just look at them and it makes me happy, and that's magical.
That is a magical moment. If you are watching on YouTube, I do not have my nails done, and I don't like doing nails. I hate it. So we are very different people, Siobhan, and that's okay. It's okay to have differences. My magic moment is the night weaning, because we went through 10 nights of roller coaster experiences. So the first few nights she was up for hours, except for the second night, which she slept through, and that's the second time she'd ever slept through in her life. But then it didn't happen again. So for 10 nights, it was chaos. It was roller coasters. I was like, I don't think she's ready. I'm going to give up soon. I'm going to get to day 14. And if it's still not working, then she's not ready. And that's okay. We'll just go back to doing what we were doing because it was working really well for us. But then night 11 through night 14, she slept through the night.
Yay!
I know, 3 nights in a row for a child that's only ever slept through twice.
Yeah. When it happens, it just feels like you need to touch all the wood and like thank all the gods and just do some kind of rain dance, because you don't know why it's working, but it's working, and let's not ask questions.
Exactly. And it got better because night 15, I'm still counting because I did a whole series on TikTok. For night 15, my daughter woke up at midnight and I had a massive headache. So I nudged my husband, who has never been able to put her back to sleep in the middle of the night, ever. Like, ever. It's just, she doesn't let it happen. And within 10 minutes, he'd put her back to sleep. So she did wake up in the middle of the night and he put her back to sleep.
This is amazing. We're still in the situation where Timo usually wakes up around 1-ish. Some nights he doesn't. It's rare. I would say like 2/3 of the night he wakes. So 2/3 of the time he wakes up around 1 or 2, and I just go into co-sleep because I can't be bothered.
That's what I do,
and it works. It works for us. But Alex has never been able to do it because Timo won't tolerate him. So even if he's going to co-sleep, Timo's like, "No, you are not my mother. Go away." So I hope that one day we might make this adjustment, but it is not this day. No. But amazing for you. How exciting.
Yeah, and that was definitely really confronting, like doing this change because it was working so well. Because when I sleep through the night, when she sleeps through the night now, it feels exactly like when I would go into her bedroom at midnight and feed her 2 or 3 times between midnight and 5 a.m. Like, I felt exactly the same because I was getting enough sleep. So I didn't want to ruin a good thing, but I also felt like I was ready for a change. And it seems that she was too. So I don't think it's just this. Amazing. This doesn't just apply to night weaning. I think it applies to parental preference too, because kids are going to get really upset about a change. And you've got to support them through that. They're going to have massive emotions. They're going to be up for hours during that change, but they are going to learn that change. And it's not cry it out because you're supporting them through it. So
no one likes change. I mean, why do you think we as parents get so triggered when our kids do things differently? Because we also hate change.
Or when we have a child.
Humans don't like change.
Like when we have a
that's
baby.
Rough.
Anyways, we've gone on for far too long today. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to chatting to you next week on After School Restraint Collapse, just in time for your kids to go back to school. And that's the concept that your kids are going to fall the F apart as soon as they get home from school. And it is so normal and so fine. But I'm going to talk all about it with Siobhan next week. I'm going to talk about why it happens, how we can counteract it, how we can help it in the moment, all that good stuff. That's coming next week. We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.